Good morning and welcome to Monday Mercy. This week is Refugees Week, a week in which we celebrate the contribution that refugees have made and continue to make across our society, and the great work being done in this area as well. It was quite difficult this morning to think about which verse to hang this message upon. You see, scripture is absolutely jam-packed with references to the refugee, the widow, the orphan, the outsider, the immigrant. It's not hard to find these verses. And they're not made in passing. They actually form part of the central flow of scripture, which is that the measure of the holiness of God's people is the way in which they treat the poor. It says in Leviticus 19, verses 33 to 34, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not ill-treat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were once foreigners in Egypt." It's a thing that Jesus picks up as well. And he says, when you treat your neighbour as yourself, treat others as you would want to be treated. So how does someone qualify to be your neighbour? Who reaches that bar? We think a lot in our culture about bars and thresholds and entitlement and levels that need to be crossed in order for people to be considered worthy of our welcome. Scripture doesn't talk like that. In fact, Tim Keller makes the point that the only qualification your neighbour needs is simply to be in your vicinity. Your neighbour has a claim on you just by being your neighbour. Over the last 6 months, we've seen an incredible welcome across the UK as families and individuals have opened up their doors and literally broken bread with refugees. Ukrainian refugees have been welcomed into our homes, into our schools, into our churches, and it's been a beautiful thing to behold, a beautiful imaging of the heart of God toward the outsider. It's really important that we don't categorise people, that we don't, as the people of God, start to adopt some of the cultural practices that are common in our nation, where we categorise people or expect people to cross a certain threshold before being considered as worthy to be our neighbour. You see, God has actually equipped us with power. He's given us a voice as well. And it's an interesting question that God asks to Moses when he says, "Moses, what is that in your hand?" And actually we are given things into our hand either to give, to share, or to withhold. Scripture is incredibly radical when it comes to refugees. I could have done this Monday Mercy and literally just read you back-to-back verses, and many of them might have seemed party political to you, too radical. Maybe it would endanger us as a charity to do reading these radical statements back to back. But that is what Scripture is like. And when we lose the heart of that, we lose the very edge of the gospel. One such controversial verse is in Deuteronomy, where it says, in Deuteronomy 27, verse 19, "Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow." So I ask again, what has God placed into your hand? What voice has he given you? Sometimes as leaders, we need to be really wise and really discerning about when we stand up and say things are right or say things are wrong. Here at Jubilee Plus, we think that when it comes to the offshore processing of refugees in Rwanda, it's a moment for Christians to speak up and to use the voice that God has placed in our hands, in our pulpits, and to proclaim what's right and what's wrong. You see, the qualification of people to be treated with dignity, mercy, justice and respect is simply that they have arrived on our shores. That is their qualification for us to treat them with mercy and justice as people made in the image of God. We don't offshore our neighbours. We treat our neighbours as we ourselves would want to be treated if we faced a situation as dangerous as they were facing. So I ask you to consider today, what's your sphere of influence? Where's your voice? And how can you use it to stand up for the fatherless, the widow, the oppressed, the outsider, the immigrant? No categories, our neighbour.